Have you ever felt that strange feeling when you're in the middle of an ordinary Monday, doing the same old things, and suddenly you ask yourself, is that all there is? I know what it's like when the alarm clock goes off and your first thought isn't one of enthusiasm, but a silent sigh before facing another day that seems the same as the last. I know that moment when you look at the calendar and realize you can't really remember what you did last week, because the days have simply blended into a dull routine. I recognize that feeling of following an invisible script every day. Wake up, brush your teeth, have coffee, go to work, come home, have dinner, watch something, go to sleep and do it all over again. As if life were just a series of tick boxes, one after the other, without much room for surprises or discoveries. It's like we're on autopilot, isn't it? Following the same paths, talking to the same people, even having the same thoughts in cycles that seem to have no end. The tiredness you sometimes feel isn't just physical, I know that. It's that deeper tiredness of realizing you're wasting energy on things that don't feed your soul. You carry out all the necessary tasks, fulfill all your obligations, but at the end of the day, when you lay your head on the pillow, something seems to be missing. As if there were an empty space inside you that all these activities can't fill, no matter how busy your day has been. It's funny how we can be physically present in one place, but our minds are completely elsewhere, isn't it? How many times have you found yourself talking to someone, nodding in agreement, while your thoughts were kilometers away? Or driving home and suddenly realizing that you can't remember the route you took because you were so absorbed in thought that your body followed the path while your mind wandered. These are small signs that we are only half present in our own lives. Many of us carry that silent question, is this what I should be doing with my time on earth? It appears at random moments, perhaps when you look out of the window during a boring meeting, or when you see a photo of someone who seems to be living intensely. It's that twinge of doubt that comes when you wonder whether you're building a life or just fulfilling other people's expectations. It's a question that we often try to stifle because looking at it head-on seems too daunting. You see, there is a subtle but profound difference between surviving and actually living, which few realize until something forces them to see it. Time, that old river that flows on, has a curious way of speeding up when we're just existing, as if it were passing straight through us without leaving any significant marks. Have you ever noticed how an entire weekend can disappear in the blink of an eye when you don't do anything special, but a single hour lived intensely remains etched in your memory for years? The moment you wake up in the morning says a lot about your relationship with life. There are those who open their eyes already thinking about all the obligations that await them, feeling the weight of the day before they even get out of bed. And there are those who, despite facing the same challenges, manage to feel a small spark of curiosity about what the new day might bring. The difference is not in what happens to us, but in how we choose to receive each moment we are given. Have you ever had that nagging feeling that while you're solving problems, answering emails, and meeting deadlines, real life is happening somewhere else? As if you were watching your own existence from afar, instead of actually being inside it, feeling every moment? We often find ourselves waiting for the end of the working day, waiting for the weekend, waiting for holidays, waiting for retirement, always putting life off until a future moment that never fully arrives. What saddens me most is how we fail to notice the little wonders of everyday life. The flavor of breakfast when we really pay attention to it. The feeling of the sun touching our skin on a nice day. The sincere smile of a stranger in the street. The beauty of a flower that insists on growing on a cracked pavement. These are the little moments that, when added together, make up a rich and full life, but which so often go unnoticed because we're too busy looking at the mobile phone screen. There is a silent conflict within many of us. On the one hand, the desire for security and stability that keeps us in familiar routines. On the other, an almost inaudible voice that calls us to something more meaningful, more authentic. It's like being caught between two worlds, the comfort of the known, however unsatisfactory, and the call to a fuller life, however uncertain. And in this impasse, we often choose the path that scares us the least, rather than the one that could make us flourish. It's funny how we've become experts at creating excuses to stay in our comfort zone. I don't have time now, I'll do this when the children are grown up, after I retire, I'll really live. It's as if we have all the time in the world, when in fact every sunset is a silent reminder that our days are finite. The clock doesn't stop for anyone, and there's an ancient wisdom in realizing that postponing life is actually giving it up. But do you know what I've realized over the years? That this discomfort, this restlessness you feel, is not a problem to be solved, it's a wake-up call. It's your soul touching your conscience, reminding you that you didn't come into this world just to pay bills and accumulate possessions. There is something greater waiting for you, something that has more to do with the quality of your presence than the quantity of your achievements. And the first step towards this transformation is simply to recognize there is a difference between existing and truly living. Have you ever noticed how nature is in no hurry and yet everything happens at the right time? A seed doesn't try to become a tree overnight. It is simply fully present at every stage of its development. First, it rests in the darkness of the earth. Then it breaks through the surface with surprising force for something so small. Then it stretches towards the light, growing slowly, day after day, year after year. The seed is never concerned with being anything other than what it is at that moment, and, curiously, that's precisely why it transforms itself. Think of the dawn. Every day, without exception, the sun rises. It's such an extraordinary spectacle that, if it only happened once in our lives, we'd probably all stop to contemplate it. However, because it happens every day, we rarely raise our eyes to appreciate this constant miracle. Isn't this a perfect metaphor for so many precious things in our daily lives? Just like the sunrise, there is extraordinary beauty in the simplest moments, if only we take the trouble to really look. There's a big difference between being busy and being engaged. Many of us confuse movement with progress, activity with fulfillment. It's like those people who spend hours in the gym, always moving but without a coherent plan, and then wonder why they don't see results. The mind works in a similar way. We can fill our days with activities, tasks, and distractions, but that doesn't mean we're investing our energy in what really matters. The real question is not how much you do, but how present you are in what you do. Have you ever noticed how children have an incredible ability to marvel at the simplest things? An ant carrying a leaf becomes a fascinating spectacle. A puddle of water becomes an ocean of possibilities. A cardboard box becomes a castle, a spaceship, a secret hiding place. At some point on the journey to adulthood, many of us lose this ability to see magic in the ordinary. We begin to filter the world through the lens of utility, immediate purpose, practical value. And the more we filter, the less we see, until life becomes just a series of tasks to fulfill. I once met a very simple man who worked as a gardener. He looked after plants with a kind of attention that we rarely see nowadays. When I asked him how he managed to maintain his enthusiasm by doing the same thing every day, he smiled and said, "But I never do the same thing. Every plant is different. Every day the soil has a different texture, the sunlight falls from a new angle, my hands feel differently." That simple man had discovered a profound secret. Monotony is not in what we do, but in how we do it. Water takes the shape of the container that holds it. It doesn't resist, it doesn't fight, it just adapts with silent elegance. But even though it is flexible, water has incredible power. It can sculpt mountains over time, sustain every form of life, and find its way through the most solid barriers. There's a profound lesson in this. We often mistake rigidity for strength and flexibility for weakness. But true strength perhaps lies in knowing how to flow like water, adapting to circumstances without losing your essence, finding paths instead of bumping into walls, nurturing life instead of resisting it. Think about how you feel when you're completely absorbed in something you love to do. Perhaps it's cooking a special meal, working on a creative project, or simply chatting to an old friend. Do you realize how time seems to change pace? How you become so present that you forget to check your phone or think about what you need to do later. These are the moments when you are truly alive, not just existing. These are moments of flow, when the division between you and what you're doing disappears. Isn't it curious that the moments when we think the least about ourselves are precisely those when we feel the fullest? The ancient philosophers had a concept called memento mori, remember that you are going to die. This may seem morbid at first glance, but it actually contains profound wisdom. When we maintain a healthy awareness of the finitude of life, our priorities naturally adjust. Suddenly, spending hours scrolling through your social media timeline no longer seems so appealing. Putting off that difficult but necessary conversation no longer makes sense. Saving your deepest feelings for someday seems like an unforgivable waste. The awareness of death is not an invitation to despair, but to authentic life. Have you ever stopped to watch a bird building its nest? It doesn't ask itself if it's doing the right thing, if the neighbor's nest is prettier, or if it should be building another kind of structure. It doesn't worry about what other birds will think. It simply follows its natural instinct, doing the best it can with what it has available. And despite this simplicity, or perhaps because of it, the result is a masterpiece of engineering perfectly adapted to its needs. How much of our unhappiness comes from constantly comparing ourselves to others, instead of following our own internal rhythm? Have you noticed how our society glorifies busy? When we ask, "How are you?" the most common response is busy. And this usually comes with a tone of pride, as if being constantly overloaded were a badge of honor. We've created a culture where a person's value is directly linked to their productivity, to how much they can accomplish in a day. And in this race to produce and conquer, we lose sight of a simple truth. Being busy is not the same as having purpose. A life full of activities can be just as empty as a life with none, if those activities don't resonate with who we really are. There's an old story about a fisherman resting peacefully in the shade of a tree after a successful morning's fishing. A passing businessman noticed the fish he had caught and suggested, "Why don't you fish more and sell the surplus?" The fisherman asked, "What for?" "To buy a bigger boat and hire helpers," replied the businessman. "And then what?" asked the fisherman. "Then you could open a company, expand your business and get rich." The fisherman, curious, asked, "And what would I do with all that wealth?" The businessman smiled triumphantly. "Then you could finally retire, live in a seaside villa, wake up late, do a bit of fishing, take a nap in the shade and spend some quiet time with your family." The fisherman smiled. "But isn't that exactly what I'm doing now?" There is a natural rhythm to all things. The tides rise and fall, the seasons come and go, the moon rises and wanes. Our bodies also have their cycles, of energy and rest, of focus and dispersion, of productivity and reflection. However, we have created a society that values only half of these cycles, the active, productive, young part. We undervalue rest, reflection, stillness, as if they were guilty indulgences or signs of weakness. But what happens to a wave that only goes up and never comes down? What happens to a lung that only breathes in and never breathes out? The full life lies not in maximizing just one part of the cycle, but in honoring the whole rhythm. There is a revelatory moment that many people describe after facing a serious health crisis or an accident that almost took their lives. Suddenly, as if a veil had been lifted, they see with crystal clarity what really matters. Relationships take on a depth never realized before. The taste of food becomes more intense. Colors seem more vibrant. The beauty of a simple sunset can bring them to tears. It's as if they are seeing the world for the first time, even though nothing in the world has changed, only the quality of their attention. The fascinating thing is that we don't have to go through a tragedy to awaken this awareness. We can choose to live like this now. The American thinker Henry David Thoreau wrote that he went to the forest to live deliberately. That word, deliberately, contains a whole philosophy of life. Living deliberately means making conscious choices rather than being swept along by the current of habits and expectations. It means regularly asking yourself, is this bringing me closer to or further away from the kind of person I want to be? Does this activity reflect my deepest values or does it just fill time? When we start to live deliberately, we realize how many of our actions are automatic, conditioned reflexes rather than authentic choices. There is a concept called false urgency that dominates many of our modern lives. It's that constant feeling that everything needs to be done immediately, that every notification deserves instant attention, that every email must be answered on the spot. We live in a permanent state of alert, as if we were always putting out small fires. The problem is that, in this mode of operation, our mind never has the chance to go deeper, to make creative connections, to really absorb experiences. We're always on the surface, sliding from one thing to another. And deep, meaningful life happens in the depths, not on the surface. Have you ever noticed how certain people seem to have a special presence? When they enter an environment, you feel it. When they speak, people naturally lean in to listen. It's not a question of superficial charisma or communication techniques. It's something deeper. These people are completely there, body, mind, and spirit aligned in the present moment. They're not mentally rehearsing what they're going to say next or worrying about the impression they're making. They are simply present, anchored in themselves. And this quality of presence is magnetic. The curious thing is that this presence is not a rare talent that few are born with. It's a capacity inherent in all of us that has been covered up by the noise and fragmentation of modern life. One of the biggest robbers of our vitality is the habit of ruminating on the past and worrying about the future. We spend hours mentally reliving conversations that have already happened, decisions that can't be changed, mistakes that have already been made. Or we project anxieties into the future, imagining catastrophic scenarios, worrying about problems that may never happen. And while our mind is lost in this time traveling, the only moment we can really live in, the now, goes unnoticed. It's like always looking at a map, so focused on where we've been or where we're going that we don't notice the actual landscape we're passing through. There's a simple but deeply revealing question we can ask ourselves. If I had just 1 year to live, how would I choose to live? Look carefully at your answers. You probably haven't thought about spending more hours at the office or accumulating more possessions. It's more likely that you thought about meaningful connections, experiences you've always wanted to have, authentic expressions of who you are. The fascinating thing about this question is not only what it reveals about our true priorities, but the fact that, in reality, we don't know how much time we have. 1 year, 5 decades, or just one more day. This fundamental uncertainty makes the question not just a hypothetical exercise, but a real compass for our daily choices. One of the great traps we fall into is the belief that happiness is always somewhere in the future. I'll be happy when I get that job, when I get married, when I have children, when my children grow up, when I retire. It's a horizon that always recedes as we move forward. And while we chase that future happiness, we fail to realize the infinite possibilities for joy that exist right where we are. As the wise man once said, there is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path. This doesn't mean that we should ignore goals or stop planning for the future, but rather that the quality of our journey matters just as much as the destination. There is a subtle but profound difference between reacting and responding to life. Reacting is automatic, impulsive, conditioned by our habits and fears. Responding, on the other hand, involves a pause, that small space between the stimulus and our action, where our freedom of choice resides. In the words of psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl, between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Cultivating this space, this conscious pause, can radically transform how we relate to everything that happens in our lives. One of the most revealing symptoms of a life lived on autopilot is the inability to be surprised. When everything becomes predictable, when we believe we already know exactly how things are, we close the door to new discoveries. The philosopher and educator John Dewey said that the root of all intellectual growth lies in preserving the attitude of the child, characterized by ardent curiosity, fertile imagination, and a love of experimental investigation. In other words, keeping the sense of wonder alive. When we observe the world as if we were always seeing it for the first time, even the most everyday experiences become sources of wonder and learning. It's surprising how often we look outside ourselves for answers when the wisdom we seek is already within. We consume self-help books, attend inspirational talks, follow gurus and experts, all in search of guidance that we somehow already know deep down inside. There's nothing wrong with learning from others, of course. But there is an intuitive knowledge, an internal compass that whispers constantly, although its voice is often drowned out by the noise of external opinions. When we create space for silence, when we allow ourselves to really listen to this inner voice, we discover that many of the answers we were looking for were already there, waiting to be recognized. One of the greatest ironies of modern life is how, in the midst of so much technological connectivity, many of us have never felt so disconnected. We have hundreds or thousands of friends and followers online, but deep, meaningful conversations have become a rarity. We can instantly communicate with people on the other side of the planet, but we barely know our neighbors. This sense of disconnection isn't accidental, It's a direct result of the kind of connections we prioritize. Fast, superficial connections in large numbers have replaced slower, deeper connections in smaller numbers. And just as a diet rich in empty calories can leave us simultaneously overweight and malnourished, a social life full of superficial interactions can leave us paradoxically isolated. Consider for a moment the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what you're capable of. I'm not creative. I've always been shy. I'm terrible with numbers. I've never had the willpower. These personal narratives profoundly shape our behavior and choices, often without us even realizing it. The curious thing is that many of these stories are not based on immutable truths about ourselves, but on interpretations of past experiences, often formed when we were too young to understand the full context. Questioning these limiting narratives is not about denying real aspects of who we are, but about making room for a broader, truer story, one that recognizes both our limitations and our untapped possibilities. What we choose to observe and celebrate expands in our consciousness. It's a simple but transformative principle. When we devote our attention to the problems, the flaws, what's missing, our brain becomes an expert at detecting more of these things. It's as if we installed a filter that highlights everything that's wrong. On the other hand, when we deliberately notice what's working, the small everyday miracles, the moments of beauty and connection, we train our brain to recognize more of these experiences too. This doesn't mean ignoring real challenges or pretending that everything is fine when it's not. It means recognizing that, at any given moment, there are multiple truths about our situation, and we have the power to choose which ones to focus our limited energy on. A small exercise that can shed a lot of light on your relationship with life is to simply observe your awakening. In the first few moments after opening your eyes, what thoughts come naturally? Are they thoughts of gratitude for the new opportunity the day represents? Or are they immediate worries about everything that needs to be done? Does your body tend to contract with anxiety or expand with anticipation? There are no right or wrong answers here, just valuable information. Because these first moments of the day often reveal our basic orientation towards life. And the beauty of this exercise lies in its simplicity. It requires no extra time, special equipment, or advanced training. Just a willingness to notice what is already happening. The quality of our questions determines the quality of our lives. When faced with a difficulty, we can ask, why does this always happen to me? Directing our mind to look for evidence that we are victims of fate. Or we can ask, what can I learn from this situation? Or how can I respond in a way that brings me closer to the kind of person I want to be? The first question leads us to impotence and resentment. The others open doors to growth and possibilities. Change begins not necessarily with different answers, but with different questions. In a world that celebrates multitasking and frenetic productivity, there is a revolutionary power in doing one thing at a time, with your full attention. Try it, if only for 5 minutes. Just do what you're doing. If you're drinking a cup of tea, just drink it. Feel its warmth, its aroma, its flavor, without simultaneously planning the day or checking your phone. If you're talking to someone, just talk. Listen with your whole being, without formulating your response while the person is still talking. If you're walking, just walk. Feel your feet touching the ground, the air on your face, the sounds around you. It's amazing how something so simple can seem so difficult at first, and how deeply restorative it can be for a nervous system used to the constant fragmentation of attention. One practice that can bring about a subtle but profound change in your daily experience is to simply notice what is good. Not in a forced or artificial way, but with genuine curiosity. When you wake up, it could be the feel of the soft sheet against your skin. At breakfast, it could be the vibrant flavor of fresh fruit. On the way to work, it could be a song that plays on the radio and brings back happy memories. At work, it could be a moment of clarity when solving a problem. The key is not to ignore the challenges or pretend that everything is perfect, but to recognize that even on the most difficult days, there are moments of relief, beauty, or connection that we often overlook. Like a thirsty person in the desert who doesn't notice the little oases on their path. One of the simplest and most powerful practices for recalibrating our relationship with life is to set aside moments for deliberate silence. It doesn't have to be an hour of formal meditation. It can be as little as 3 minutes with no external stimuli, no screens, no music, no conversations, no books. Just you and your immediate experience. At first, this silence can seem uncomfortable, even threatening. Our mind, used to constant stimulation, may protest loudly. But if we persist, something subtle begins to change. The nervous system slows down. Breathing deepens. The mind gradually quiets down. And in this space of stillness, we can begin to hear a wiser voice that is usually drowned out by the constant noise of our daily lives. One change that almost always brings more vitality to life is re-examining our relationship with time. Many of us operate with a chronic sense of time scarcity. There's never enough time. We're always running behind, always late. This constant pressure not only generates stress, but also impoverishes our experience of the present. A different approach is to treat time not as a scarce resource to be maximized, but as a gift to be honored. This can mean deliberately slowing down, even when it seems we can't. It can mean leaving blank spaces. It can mean leaving blank spaces in our diary instead of filling it to the brim. It can mean recognizing that, as precious as time is, it's not something we can really manage or optimize. It's something we live, moment by moment, breath by breath. One discovery that many people make along the way is that life becomes richer not when we add more things, but when we remove the unnecessary. This applies to physical objects as well as activities, relationships, and commitments. Ask yourself, what can I simplify? What can I eliminate? What is taking up space in my life without really adding value? This is not a question of asceticism or deprivation, but of discernment, of consciously choosing what deserves your limited time and energy, rather than diluting it among 1,000 different things. Like a gardener who prunes carefully to allow the most beautiful flowers to bloom fully. Another fundamental insight is that our lives take on the character of what we surround ourselves with on a regular basis. The books we read, the conversations we have, the spaces we spend time in, the people we hang out with, all these elements subtly shape us, often without us even realizing it. That's why it's worth asking, what influences do I allow into my life? Do they elevate or diminish me? Do they broaden my perspective or narrow it? Do they connect me with my deepest values or distance me from them? Again, this is not about moralistic judgment, but about conscious attention to the forces that are constantly shaping who we become. A powerful practice for cultivating presence is to simply notice your senses. At any moment, ask yourself, what am I seeing now? What am I hearing? What am I feeling through touch? What smells and flavors are present? This attention to the senses instantly anchors us in the present moment. When we notice the colors, textures, sounds and sensations around us, our mind naturally moves away from ruminations about the past and worries about the future. It's like adjusting the focus of a camera. Suddenly what was blurry and indistinct becomes vivid and clear. And the amazing thing is that this practice is always available, anywhere, at any time. It requires nothing more than our willingness to notice what is already here. One of the biggest obstacles to a fulfilling life is the fear of other people's judgment. How many times do we stop doing something we really want to do because we're afraid of what others will think? How many authentic parts of ourselves do we keep hidden for fear of rejection or criticism? It's useful to remember that most people are so preoccupied with their own image that they barely have time to judge ours. And even when they do, their judgments usually say more about them than about us. What's more, at the end of our lives, we rarely regret the criticism we've received. We regret the times we didn't have the courage to be true to ourselves. As the poet Mary Oliver asked, "Tell me, what do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" A subtle but powerful change we can make is to replace "I have to" with "I choose to." I have to go to work becomes I choose to go to work because I value the financial security and contribution I make. I have to visit my parents becomes I choose to visit my parents because I value our relationship, even when it's complicated. This small linguistic change isn't just cosmetic, it reflects and reinforces a fundamental shift in perspective. We go from being victims of circumstances to being the authors of our lives. We recognize that, even within real limitations, there is always some element of choice in how we respond, in what meaning we attach to situations, in what values we prioritize. And in this recognition lies a peculiar kind of freedom. One of the most liberating discoveries we can make is that we don't have to believe everything we think. Our thoughts are not irrefutable facts about reality, they are interpretations, based on our past experiences, conditioning, fears, and desires. When we learn to observe our thoughts with a little distance, instead of completely identifying with them, we gain new freedom. I'm noticing the thought that I'll never succeed is very different from I'll never succeed. The former creates space, the latter imprisons us. This ability to observe our own mind doesn't require years of meditation, although that can help. It simply begins with a willingness to question our certainties and the curiosity to investigate our habitual mental processes. What makes a life meaningful is not the absence of difficulties, but the presence of purpose. In the words of the philosopher Nietzsche, he who has a reason for living can endure almost anyhow. When we connect our daily actions, even the most mundane ones, to something greater than ourselves, be it a value we hold dear, a cause we support, people we love, or a vision of the world we want to create, these actions gain a depth and resilience that transcend immediate circumstances. The purpose doesn't have to be grandiose or heroic. It can be as simple as creating beauty wherever you are, or treating every person you meet with respect and compassion, or using your specific talents to contribute in some way to the well-being of others. One of the most powerful tools we have for creating a meaningful life is our ability to pay attention. In the end, the quality of our life is determined not by what happens to us, but by what we notice, what we appreciate, what we value. Two individuals can experience exactly the same external situation and have radically different experiences, simply because of the quality and direction of their attention. This is why cultivating conscious attention is not a spiritual luxury, but a fundamental practical skill. Like a lighthouse that illuminates whatever comes into its beam of light, our attention transforms what we touch with it. There is a natural tendency in us to look for definitive answers, guaranteed recipes, detailed maps of life's territory. We want to know exactly what to do, how to do it, and what results to expect. But life rarely cooperates with this desire for certainty. It's more like a wild river than an artificial canal, flowing, changing, surprising, sometimes peaceful, sometimes turbulent. True wisdom lies not in trying to control this flow, but in learning to skillfully navigate within it. It's not about eliminating uncertainty, but developing a different relationship with it, seeing it not as a threat to be avoided, but as a field of possibilities to be explored. A common characteristic among people who live fully is their ability to keep a beginner's mind. Even after decades of doing something, they approach each new experience with fresh curiosity, as if they still had a lot to learn, which, in fact, we always do. This open-mindedness is not naivety, but a deep wisdom that recognizes the inexhaustible complexity and mystery of life. As an old Zen master used to say, in the mind of the beginner there are many possibilities, in the mind of the expert, few. When we think we already know everything about something, a relationship, a job, ourselves, we close the door to new discoveries and growth. The beginner's mind keeps that door ajar. There is surprising power in making peace with our vulnerability. Our culture often equates vulnerability with weakness, encouraging us to hide our doubts, fears, and imperfections behind a facade of competence and control. But there is a paradoxical strength in recognizing and accepting our human limitations. When we stop spending so much energy pretending to be invulnerable, we free up that energy for authentic growth and deeper connections. The most transformative people I have met are not those who never fail or doubt, but those who have found a way to integrate their vulnerabilities into a more complete and authentic personality. One of the biggest lies we tell ourselves is that happiness will come when we reach certain external milestones, when we get the right job, the right partner, the right house, the right body, the right recognition. The truth is that these milestones may bring temporary satisfaction, but they rarely produce lasting happiness, because our mind soon normalizes each new situation and starts looking for the next target. It's like trying to quench your thirst by drinking salt water. The most sustainable happiness usually comes not from changing our external circumstances, although this is sometimes necessary, but from transforming our relationship with those circumstances, from learning to appreciate what we already have, from finding meaning even in difficulties, from nurturing deep connections, from contributing to something bigger than ourselves. There is a common misconception that living fully means being always happy, always positive, always at the peak of experience. This one-dimensional view of fulfillment is not only unrealistic, but potentially harmful, as it leads us to reject essential parts of the human experience. A full life is not one that contains only positive emotions, but one in which we are able to feel the full range of human experience, joy and sadness, trust and fear, connection and loneliness, without identifying completely with any of these states, recognizing them as temporary visitors in our consciousness. Wholeness lies not in the absence of challenges, but in our ability to be fully present to whatever arises, embracing both the light and the shadow of our experience. One discovery that often brings deep relief is that we don't need to solve all our problems to live fully in the present. Many of us operate with the unconscious belief that I'll be happy when I resolve all my issues. But if we look honestly, we'll see that while we solve some problems, others naturally arise. It's part of the human condition. True liberation comes not from eliminating all problems, but from realizing that we can live richly and meaningfully even in the midst of our unresolved issues. As the poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "Be patient with all that is unresolved in your heart. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will gradually, without realizing it, live your way to the answers." One of the most profound discoveries we can make is that the quality of our presence is the most valuable gift we can offer to ourselves and to others. Not our perfection, not our achievements, not our knowledge or productivity, but simply our total, attentive, and compassionate presence. When we are truly present with someone, listening not just to their words, but to the feeling behind them, without judging, without trying to fix, without planning what we will say next, we offer something rare and precious in today's world. In the same way, when we are fully present to our own experience, to our joys and pains, to our successes and failures, we give ourselves the gift of self-compassion and authenticity. The stories we tell about our lives have enormous power in shaping how we experience those lives. When we understand that we are both the authors and the main characters of our story, we gain the freedom to reinterpret our past in ways that empower us rather than limit us. This doesn't mean denying or distorting reality, but recognizing that there are always multiple ways of interpreting the events of our lives. We can see challenges as unfair punishments or as opportunities for growth. We can see our mistakes as proof of our inadequacy or as necessary steps on our learning journey. The choice is ours, and that choice makes all the difference to the quality of our experience. Modern physics teaches us that, at the subatomic level, everything is interconnected in a constant dance of energy and information. There are no separate objects, only relationships. In a way, this scientific discovery echoes what mystics and philosophers have been saying for millennia. We are all expressions of an interconnected web of life. This understanding of interconnectedness is not just a theoretical curiosity, but a perspective that can profoundly transform how we live. When we truly internalize that we are not isolated entities, but nodes in a vast network of relationships, our priorities naturally change. The well-being of others becomes inseparable from our own. Competition gives way to collaboration. Exploitation gives way to sustainability. Individualism is balanced with a broader sense of belonging and shared responsibility. There is an ancient and simple practice that has the power to transform our relationship with life: gratitude. Not the superficial gratitude we often express out of social habit, but a deep and heartfelt appreciation of the miracle of existence. Consider for a moment what had to happen for you to be alive at this very moment, reading these words. Billions of years of cosmic evolution. Millions of ancestors who survived long enough to pass on their genes. Countless people who have contributed to the knowledge, technology, culture, and language that make this communication possible. The air we breathe, the food that nourishes us, the water that sustains us, none of it is taken for granted, none of it is earned, all of it is an extraordinary gift. When we cultivate this awareness of the preciousness and improbability of our existence, even the most ordinary moments can become a source of wonder. In the end, perhaps the question isn't so much, are you living or just existing? But are you present for whatever is happening now? Because life isn't something we achieve or conquer, it's something we experience, moment by moment, breath by breath. There is no future moment when we will finally be really living. There is only this moment, and our choice to inhabit it fully or not. And the miracle is that this choice is always available, no matter what our external circumstances. With every breath, We have a new opportunity to awaken to the fullness of life that is already here, just waiting for our loving attention. As the mystic Meister Eckhart said centuries ago, if the only moment of prayer you say in your whole life is thank you, that would be enough.